and welcome to all the attendees today. I'm super excited. I know you're all here to speak and listen, hear our esteemed, eminent guests, and I'd like to introduce them and take the opportunity to do so. I'd like to start off with introducing Courtney Clark. Courtney is the Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs at Solventum, also previously named 3M Healthcare. Courtney has 23 years of experience in the industry. She actually started her career in quality and then transitioned into regulatory affairs while working at a class 3 med device startup 15 years ago. She has worked in regulatory affairs for companies in the dental, sterilization, and cardiovascular industries, and has personally authored 13 different types of submissions for all classes of medical devices. Welcome, Courtney. Our second guest today, our panelist, is Sue. Sue Dahlquist is the Senior Director, Strategic Regulatory and Clinical Affairs at Thermo Fisher. Sue is responsible for leading the development of regulatory policy and advocacy efforts across all of Thermo Fisher, and she works with the businesses to interpret and implement new regulations and guidelines. Sue has over 30 years of experience in the medical device and life sciences industries, including 24 of those years in regulatory affairs. And last but not least, we have Don Ellis. Don Ellis is the Vice President of Quality and Regulatory Affairs at Reva Medical. Don has over 30 years of experience in ensuring that new and existing products meet global regulatory requirements, with direct responsibility for overseeing corporate regulatory, quality, validation, engineering, clinical affairs, and document control functions. Most recently, Don was the head of regulatory affairs for coronary products with Philips Image Guided Therapy Corporation, and he has held leadership roles in medical device companies that participate in the fields of both in vitro diagnostics, vascular, cardiovascular, and diagnostic imaging. We couldn't have had a better panelist, and I'm so delighted to be speaking with them. I know our discussion today the topic is advancing medical device compliance through regulatory management systems and AI. I personally, and I met Sue there as well, we returned from RAPS last week, and there was a lot of conversation about RIM platforms and regulatory management systems and AI, and the timing of this conversation couldn't be more ideal. I'd like to start our discussion for today with the question for our panelists to gather their thoughts on how, or just in general, about medical device companies adopting regulatory management platforms. And I know all of you have dealt with that topic and have adopted regulatory management platforms and technology. So I would like to, perhaps, Sue, would you like to provide your thoughts on this? Oh, Sue, you're muted.
I'm showing myself as unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. Yeah, so we have adopted a RIMS platform in the last couple of years. And it was one I was really excited to be able to bring to the company because, it really helps us improve our efficiencies across all that regulatory does. I think a lot of people, in partner functions don't quite understand the soup to nuts that comes with regulatory and even keeping the products on the market and the things that need to be done. So I think having a RIM system in place has really helped us towards standardizing our work across the company and towards being more efficient in how we get products to market.
Don, would you like to take this on?
I've been in the industry for quite some time and have been using tools that I would call regulatory information management tools, but I think most of the audience and most of the panelists have used Microsoft Excel to track documents and submissions all the way through Microsoft Access databases that you or somebody else in your team is writing at home in the weekends to try to track these things more effectively and more efficiently. So I'm thrilled and amazed at the progress that solution providers like RegDesk have made in making these tools more expansive in what they can do for us, more intuitive in how they do those things for us, and allowing us to address more of the business critical issues associated with it. I love the expression that you just used, Priya, which is regulatory management tools rather than regulatory information management, because that's at the end of the day what we're here to do, is to try to get the information that our sponsor companies are preparing to the boards of health, have the discussions to allow us to have those products be accessible by the treating physicians and treat patients. That's our role in the organization, and I think for many of us, our mission in life is to be able to provide high quality healthcare to as many people as we can. And again, I think these are really inventive, novel tools growing through the use of AI in ways that can do things for us that were unimaginable 5 years ago.
Very true. And we're going to get to the AI part later in our discussion. But before we proceed to that, Courtney, any thoughts on medical device companies adopting regulatory management platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this day and age, the goal is really to get out of tracking things on spreadsheets, as Don said. Having multiple spreadsheets and on people's desktops really isn't a good way to be agile, and you can miss things. So automating any information we can is really a way to increase agility and make things easier for our teams. These global companies that we work at are selling products in well over 100 countries with thousands of SKUs, and just making sure all of your licenses stay up to date is a challenge. Add in the complexity of regulatory intelligence changes and manual processes for change assessments and communicating with your rest of world associates. You're spending a lot of resource time not actually doing submissions or registrations for market access, which is essentially the return on the investment of the regulatory function. So, I think the RIMS system can help us with our resource load so that we can really focus on getting market access and getting those products to the patients that need them.
I would concur. I mean, I'm coming from the vendor side. We built a platform for that purpose, but I'll tell you, 2 years ago, the word RIM, the regulatory or even regulatory management systems and technology were not a factor in medical device companies' decisions of how they will proceed moving forward. They were very content with their spreadsheets, and there's just been a shift. And it's great to see that shift for companies like us. But it is important. It's if we feel that if medtech companies don't get on board with technology platforms, they will be left behind with just the rapid changes to regulations and the upkeep of it all. Speaking of that and the changes, what in your opinion are the emerging regulatory trends that have the potential to reshape the compliance landscape?
Yeah, I was just at the International Medical Device Regulators Forum last week, so IMDRF, and a lot of the buzzwords I think that I heard at the meeting earlier this year were continued in the one just last week. A lot around recognition and reliance. So one regulator's, utilizing the approval from another regulator to either speed up, have a reduced review, or to accept that, full out without having any review. I think that's a truly ideal state. I don't know if we'll get there before my retirement, but I definitely think it's a buzzword, and the regulators are talking about it and how they're moving towards that. But it doesn't always seem that we're moving towards that direction when we constantly have new regulations coming out that we have to adapt to and interpret and figure out how we're going to meet those. And I think not even what we would typically think of as regulations for medical device products or pharma products, but really a lot around, the environmental space now. And, sustainability issues and the requirements that we as companies have to meet there. You've got cybersecurity. So just, I think they're coming at us from all different ways, and it tends to be a lot to keep up with sometimes and get the strategies in place for how we're going to deal with them.
Courtney?
Yeah, I mean, you see, automation coming up everywhere, right? So electronic submissions are starting to come out. Obviously, eStar, now Canada's looking at a process for that. You've got the continuation of EU MDR with, their UDAMED database, right? And you've got more countries launching UDI programs and requirements for information in their own databases. So a lot of things going into software systems and being automated. So, again, I think there's definitely a need to have a significant amount of regulatory and attribute information per product readily accessible. And when you're dealing with spreadsheets and information manually, it's really hard, to be agile in order to keep up with those regulations and the technology that eventually the regulators will have put in place.
Agreed. Don, any thoughts on the emerging trends?
No, again, I think Courtney just mentioned something that is a challenge for me, and I think an emerging challenge for all the other organizations. The UDAMED is a database. China's creating their own version of UDI registration databases. Regulatory affairs is changing because there are more activities that are associated with regulatory affairs that weren't directly related to the actual submission work. I don't know how many folks have had to go through the EU MDR process, and now you have these things, clinical summaries of information that previous classifications of devices didn't have to compile, but now I've got regulatory people who've got to become fluent in the clinical use of the applications, and then communicating that information not only to the regulators, but to information management portals like UDAMED. So regulatory affairs is getting to the point now where it's really hard to figure out how to have manual interaction with all the data repositories that a global multinational or even a small startup company will need to interact with in order to sustain their products on the market.
Very true. Great points. We provide regulatory intelligence, and we are receiving requests for cybersecurity, for environmental health, which we weren't receiving. And just looking at the regulatory changes and how active globally countries are, it's scary, yet you need better systems in place. It is almost impossible to keep up with such changes. And I know IMDRF's main objective has been forever, since I started in this career path of regulatory in medtech. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we're all wishing that there will be harmonization. It'll make life easier. But there is definitely much more advancement in the harmonization with the eStar, and then now Canada adopting the eStar as well. So let's see, it's going in the right direction, but at the same time, more and more countries are also coming up with more stringent requirements as well. It's a good mix. And to sort of piggyback on the previous question, with the emerging trends that we just discussed, what technology trends do you foresee being adapted in the regulatory space in the next 2 years? Where do you see us going technology-wise then?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I can start first. I think again, another one of the buzzwords that everyone's talking about is AI, and we're asked constantly by our team, within that are managing that within our company, is how can you use AI within the business and the regulatory space, again, to be more efficient, to get to market sooner. What are we doing, and how are what different tools can we use on top of a regulatory management system? What are different ways? So can we use AI, And, when new regulations come out, we're the ones who need to read and interpret and say what the changes are, or if it's new and how it's going to impact us. Does AI help us in any way? Can we put things into our AI tool and have it compare new to old? And, I think what we're finding in the, where the capability is right now is, yes, it does a fine job of summarizing, but you always need that human to look at it and interpret it, because it doesn't have the same history and background that we have to be able to really put the details around what that means. But it's definitely something, we're hoping can save time, because when you get some of these regulations, they're 300 pages long and they're really deep and dense, and to sit and take the time, it's hours and hours and hours. So any way that we could use AI to simplify that and help us do the review of that and be able to summarize, for leadership, I think super helpful, and we're looking, always in ways to improve that.
Yeah, I'll completely back you up with that, Sue. I think any of these tedious tasks that we have to do in regulatory that take up our resources, where we can automate or use AI, would be a great help to our space. Anything from creating a GSPR or managing standard updates when they change, or the reg intel and the regulation changes like Sue mentioned, would be a great help to, lighten the load of our resources and hopefully move things forward quicker in those areas. I've also, think about applying AI to submission writing, which might be useful in the regulatory space, as technical writing skills are sometimes hard to come by. However, we kind of need to solve the problem of having confidential information in an AI platform, or of course, what makes sense from a budget standpoint to have a confidential AI platform in-house. But I think, again, to Sue's point, you kind of always need that human interaction to verify things. But it would be really interesting to see how far we can go with AI for creating submissions and doing tedious tasks that we spend a lot of resource time on a daily basis.
Don, any?
Nothing to add, because I think that they touched on, you asked what buzzword or what trend. It's all about the title of this program, and it is the topic that everyone is talking about. Is you can't even buy a juicer anymore without it being branded with AI. How do we take this amorphous thing called artificial intelligence and use it to address real problems and help the organization run more efficiently? In this forum, how do we use those tools to be able to make the world of managing our product regulated easier, cleaner, simpler, more efficient? And that's a constant evolving challenge, but I think that's the fun part of this is exploring new tools and being able to bring those resources to bear in your organization.
Correct. And we get asked all the time, can you use AI to summarize your regulatory intelligence? And we're not fully relying on AI to read the laws and synthesize them for you, because there needs to be a human eye, and we don't know if AI is there yet, or natural language processing is at the level that it can truly decipher and ensure that it's reading the document. We are training AI models on top of our reg intel, but that is something that's asked. I mean, what's exciting is that companies are asking for AI tools. And again, a year ago, from our perspective vantage point, AI would scare companies because they were scared as to how can I just rely on AI. And now it's great to see regulatory leaders demanding and asking for such tools, which is very exciting for us. And I know, well, Courtney, you mentioned rework and resources. I can't tell you how many times we keep hearing that. And there clearly is a shift there too, right? Because you didn't hear leaders complaining about rework and the use of resources as much. Why do you think that is? Why are we now noticing the use of our resources more now than it being a priority or an issue a year ago even?
Oh, I'll be mean-spirited. Most of those are in our budgeting in our organizations. We are costs. We're not a profit generator. So they're going to be looking at us because we impact the top line of the organization, and our costs end up driving a lower bottom line profitability for the organization. So I know in my organization and in my past organizations, they're always looking at how do we operate more effectively and how do we operate more efficiently, so that we can execute the role and do it at the lowest possible cost to the business. It's just a reality of what our role is, and we can't put ourselves associated with sales and marketing or with R&D, which get different treatment from the financial perspective and sometimes a different level of scrutiny.
Yeah, Dawn, I think you're right. And, it's sort of across the board as more companies, I think, are focusing top down with AI and looking across the businesses to see where they can use AI to create efficiencies in their process. I think that's kind of been the trigger. So it's more, it's been a buzzword and been out there for a while. I think within the last year, it's really, kind of blown up, at least I think in my world. And you kind of have not the pressure, but you have the questions are being asked. What can you do? How can we use this? Courtney, to your point before, maybe getting rid of some of the tedious works that's done. Are you at a company where you've got, higher level folks doing all the strategy and the tedious? And if we get rid of some of the, can use AI for the tedious work, does that open those folks up to spend more time in the things that are more important? And I think that's the way, I look at it, is how can we utilize the resources we have in a way that gets the most out of them and what they should be doing, focusing and working with new product development groups and working on strategies to get, market access faster, and not doing those things that really are administrative that we may potentially have some higher level regulatory folks doing.
Yeah, and I'm actually gonna, and maybe Courtney, you can address this. I wanted to discuss more, and I will have to circle back into questions more about technology, etc. But since we're talking about the budgets, this is a big topic and something we as vendors also want to learn, because it is not a profit center, right? The regulatory affairs. In that sense, well, I have two questions related to budget. So one is, how can regulatory teams create a well-balanced budget that covers, the essential compliance needs without overspending? Because getting a large budget is extremely challenging for regulatory teams. And then that being said, what are some of the key cost drivers to consider?
Yeah, I think, of course, getting money out of the executive level, you always have to show them a return on investment. So can you quantify, right, your resource load that you would save and possibly put those resources into getting products on the market faster? It's a compliance issue sometimes, right? Being, working on spreadsheets, having things fall through the cracks. Have you had licenses expire in countries? Have you had blackout periods? You can quantify those things where you've lost sales, quantify where you've had products that are late to market because of issues you may have had in the registration process. So kind of showing them, I think, the savings of all of those things has helped to get budget approvals for this type of system. And then, just the thought behind becoming, right, a well-versed, established medical device company, right, where you don't, like you said, want to be left behind, where you're still working on the spreadsheets and everybody else is using technology and automation to get their products on the market faster. I think those are some ways to kind of help with justifying the budget.
Yeah, I think you hit all the points there, Courtney. You know, sometimes it's cost avoidance and what can we, you know, what can we do and what can we avoid by, you know, putting this into place and making sure, again, it's all about market access with us, right? How quickly can we get there in all the regions too? So I think if you're looking to do this, a good idea is, if you're not doing it already, start collecting the key metrics and sort of like time from last document to time of submission prep. You know, maybe in your major countries, and then continuing that out to the regions. Because I know one of our biggest delays, and that we were able to use, you know, as support for getting a system, was people are overburdened. So you had regions and multiple regions reaching back into the businesses saying, I need these documents for my submissions. And it was emails and SharePoints, and, you know, it could take months, because if things got lost in someone's, you know, inbox and it's really far down, I mean, those are months that are delayed that we could have, you know, if you kind of do it on an as request, where the regions, you know, get the approval to go ahead and submit, and they can just go in and pull what they need to pull. It makes it a lot easier and more efficient. So we, you know, kind of tag that on it as well. We didn't really look at this from an ROI perspective of, we're going to be able to put this in place, and in 2 years, we're going to be able to reduce the group size by this amount. We didn't look at FTEs at all. It was all about efficiency. And as I said before, repurposing people's time for some more important tasks.
The only other comment I'll make, and it's not what I would encourage you to lead with as you're having these discussions with your organization, but here's a reality. There are multiple companies in our industry that are operating under consent decrees because they didn't manage their 510Ks the way that they should have, and didn't submit new 510Ks after significant changes over time. I am one of, I'm sure, many other people on the call, the recipient of a finding from our notified body that said, I can't see where you updated your technical file on an annual basis, as your quality system procedures should. So part of your story can be, again, I would say it's a minor part of your story, but a real part of the story of looking at these kinds of tools is avoiding nonconformities and avoiding regulatory challenges that are associated with being in this business and living in these roles. There are some significant downsides to not executing in regulatory affairs in the way that the regulators would want us to, and these kinds of tools used well can avoid those.
And I was going to ask that should the business cases, a lot of company leaders don't know, well, I shouldn't say don't know, but struggle with what should that business case ROI look like, because most companies don't have that baseline data that you're talking about too, of measuring the time of how long it's taking them to even produce the documents from their teams. And what you're suggesting unequivocally is that not to focus on the FTE cost reduction, not take that angle, but the angle of how it will make the team more efficient, and it will reduce non-compliance risks.
Yeah, because maybe it's a point, not that you're going to reduce people, but maybe you don't need to grow groups, right? Because this is actually making things better. So now, if we add more products and grow the company because we have this system in place, that doesn't mean an automatic add of people. So that's kind of the cost avoidance piece too, that I think you need to take into account.
Any other suggestions, Dawn and Courtney, about other factors that should be considered when creating the ROI and the budget? Because the demand, I'm telling you, most companies are recognizing they need some technology tool. How to now get the budget approved for those is where we find companies struggling the most, because their CFOs will say, I don't have a budget for this, or I'll give you a tiny budget just for Reg Intel, but then the whole management of the submission management piece is missing because all they have is Reg Intel.
I want to second Sue's comments and Courtney's comments. I think it's incumbent upon us to be better business people, to be able to define what we're trying to do, how we're trying to accomplish it, and what it takes to be able to get that done. And I think the more effective you are as a leader in pulling that information together and being able to provide a forward look at what it's going to take in order for this organization to meet its business endpoints, the easier it is to tell the elevator pitch that will get the thousands that would be necessary in order to utilize a regulatory information management tool or a regulatory management tool going forward. If you don't have that basic understanding of where you're at and what it takes to meet your company's objectives, I think it's an uphill slog that may be insurmountable. I think it all starts with having the business acumen in addition to the regulatory acumen.
Agreed. And can you put a strategy together, maybe in some cases, if you're not able to get the full budget that you're going to need, do start with Reg Intel, right, as a module, and look at it as a modular approach, like as a company, figure out what's the low hanging fruit, what will fit in the budget. If we're at close to end of year now, and you want something next year and you have nothing, are you better off trying to at least get like the first part of this, and then move on, in subsequent years to get the remainder. It's an approach if you're struggling, I think, and a way to do it, but I think you just have to have a strategy, and to Don's point, back it up with the full picture of the dollars and the savings and, the ROI and everything. I know we'll probably talk about this a little later, but that goes into evaluating the systems too, right? And cost of the systems and.
Yeah, just to echo Sue and Don, it all just comes down to the dollars and cents, right? When you put this in front of the executive team that you need to get money from. So just quantifying it somehow to either look at things that have happened in the past where you may have had blackouts or lost sales, or the avoidance of those things in the future, and how much money the team, the company can make with earlier launches, getting on the market first. And quicker launches in your global markets, if you can find a way to quantify that and get that into dollars and cents, those are the things that the executive teams start to acknowledge, I think.
And I'll leave the topic behind for so we can move forward. But the other thing I would encourage the attendees to think about, it's one of the discoveries I had when we were putting together the business case for regulatory information management solution in Philips. The vast majority of our regulatory resource was spent on sustaining work and not new product launch. And so everyone gets focused on getting market access and new market penetration. But if you stop and look at what your team is actually spending time working on, most of our regulatory affairs team was spending time on evaluating individual changes for a product, a line extension, a change in manufacturing, a change in QC procedure, the ECO review process, and then whether or not that would trigger a regulatory submission in multiple markets. Making sure you understand what the team is working on and count all of the regulatory activity as part of the business case for why we might need to work differently and utilize different tools, I think is essential.
Valid points. Speaking of, we talked about metrics, and I'm coming back to what Sue said about teams should measure metrics. This is another question. A lot of teams don't know exactly what metrics they should measure, how they should measure. That's where regulatory management tools can also come into play and be of great help. What metrics and KPIs should regulatory teams track to gauge the effectiveness of their compliance initiatives? And should these be part of the technology that they might be considering?
Yeah, I can start here. Absolutely. So, as we are in the process of implementing our RIM system, our current way to track our metrics is on spreadsheets, of course. And it's very cumbersome and time consuming, especially when it comes to, taking the metrics for the month and trying to report on it. So the metrics that we typically use, of course, are time to market, right? That's what leadership cares about. So being able to track the prep time of the submission can really help you look at maybe the quality of your documentation and trend on that and see where improvements are needed. The timing of your planned versus actual submission dates, and the same thing with approvals. Where are you at with your planned versus actual approval dates? And then how can you report on that? So having the RIM availability to, just export a report to tell us where those things are, it makes it a lot easier for tracking and trending. Where we'd like to see in the future is a system that can track deficiencies and monitor repeat deficiencies so we can improve the quality of our documentation and testing strategies. That's something that we'll still have to do manually, but that is a KPI that we track. And I'd love to see how we could implement that into the RIM system in the future.
Yeah, so Courtney, I think those are good points. One thing I will say, and I'm sure all of you who've been in regulatory have seen this, is a lot of times on like new product development projects, time slipped. So, R&D's time might slip, and then this time might slip, but regulatory submission always stays the same. We don't get to slip when they slip. So I think, important when you're saying plan time to submission and preparation, I've done it before where it's time to submission once that last document's received. Right? Because we have no control over, our time getting tighter and tighter. But really for this to measure, if you're using this as part of your, here's our ROI, is really to understand how it improves the regulatory person's actual, like, I'm getting all the documents together, I'm hitting the button to go. So I think that's just one thing to keep in mind is our targets never move.
The fun metric, I don't know how fun it is. It's hard sometimes in organizations, but one that gets the business people's attention first is regulatory affairs talking about business in business language. For us, revenue lost or revenue recognition lost because of regulatory submissions. If you're in a company that's got product in international markets, some of those international registrations expire. So how many times have you lost revenue or lost sales because you couldn't ship because of registration had to be renewed and we didn't have it renewed on time in order to support shipment? So block sales or lost sales associated with the regulatory activities and regulatory process is an important metric to track. You get that number to be high enough and people will give you whatever tools you need in order to make sure that we hit our sales goals and sales targets.
How should a team evaluate, and what should they consider when evaluating regulatory management systems? What processes worked well for you when you were in that position? What would you recommend?
I'm going to start here and I'm going to make a general comment. I think it's important to figure out what you're trying to accomplish, and it's horses for courses. There are tools that are great extensions to databases that will help you with, if it's just document management, then pick a solution that allows you to take documents out of your document management repository and store them in the structure of a submission. And I would pick a different solution if that was my pain point, than a solution that helps me interact with international markets and generate international submissions. So I think it's important for each individual and each organization to first decide what they're trying to accomplish, and based on what they're trying to accomplish, then the tool selection could be very different.
Yeah, so, from our experience, Dawn, I agree. So it's the requirements, right? Like, and I think the requirements will be very different from a small company who might have a few products, US and Europe, versus, a global company. For us, we went through a pretty stringent process. We had to partner with our stakeholders in IT and quality IT and make sure, our cybersecurity folks and, privacy folks, and make sure all of their questions were addressed. So we went through an official, RFI, RFP process. And I would say our RFI probably had about, 200 lines to it. So very involved across a lot of different things, obviously the capabilities, and do the capabilities meet the requirements that you need? User interface was a big one for us, because these types of products, no matter how great they are, have a very steep learning curve. And so you want to make sure that you're providing something to your folks that they're actually going to want to interact with and use. You don't want something that's so complicated that they're just going to, be fed up and not do it. But, we looked at, with the configurable, do you have a disaster recovery plan? Do you have, so there was all these requirements from the IT side. I think the regulatory side was probably a lot easier, because we know what we need to get, from point A to point B. And so those requirements being met, I think were much easier than some of our IT and other stakeholders. But we had that all in our RFI and RFP, and we evaluated a pretty, big group. And then we went from that, we narrowed it down, and then we did in-depth demos with our regulatory stakeholders. So we brought regulatory folks in from across the business to sit in on that, so they could really pick and ask questions and make sure that they felt comfortable with the choice that we were moving forward with.
Yeah, just to add from our experience, I think, of course, you want to look at what problem you're trying to solve, and look at a RIM system that will meet your needs. When we're looking at evaluating a bunch of different companies, really look at what your products are, right? Are you focusing on pharma, or are you focusing on device, or do you have both? I found a lot of the I would say more legacy, more established RIMS developers started in pharma, or were based on the clinical side of things. And then they say, hey, yeah, we can do it for device. But once you really get into the system, you're having to do a lot of workarounds. It's not really made for device. I've seen at a previous company them try to implement a, made for pharma, but we can do it for device RIM system. And they spent 2 years trying to make it work, and eventually it just failed. So that was one of our, kind of keys of the decision-making process, was really finding a RIM system that was focused on our device world, understand, and had the functionality for our type of submissions, our type of problems to solve, because it is different when you go from pharma to device. So I would say focus on what your company needs, as far as, just what your product lines are.
Very true, Courtney, because there are a lot of companies that have dealt with that pain of adopting a RIM, and sometimes they just go by the brand name, and it's more pharma based, and then you're trying to plug in device and device product attributes in a system that was built for pharma, and it just doesn't match, and you end up wasting a lot of time and resources in such an effort. So if you're a device company, look for a device RIM platform, and if you're pharma, look for that you have to have very separate systems. So just the nature of the products, the way the submission management, everything is quite different between devices and pharma. That we have received a bunch of questions, and one I was gonna ask regarding AI. We talked about sort of what you believe are the future trends of AI in the compliance space. The question that always comes up with AI is the scary part of it. How do you trust the data? How do you validate the data that is being generated by AI? Any thoughts on that? I know you're not AI experts per se, but just as leaders, how are you getting your mind around and the comfort level around AI and the use of AI?
I think it's go on, Don.
No, the first thing I would say is to understand and target where you are going to try to use AI. AI can mean many, many, many things and many, many different workflows within this regulatory space. So understanding where you're trying to apply AI, where it would have the biggest bang for the buck, and also which gives you the greatest possibility of success. AI in the form of using something like GPT functionality in order to write submissions, That, in my view, is a scary hornet's nest that we aren't ready to tackle. There are intellectual property issues. There are informational issues. I think I saw in the questions, there's the maintenance and the care and feeding of the lexicon that the tool is using that are probably greater than the potential savings that would come from using AI to write the documents. My regulatory specialists are pretty sharp. They can write the 510K pretty quickly, and sometimes maybe more quickly and with better accuracy than we might be able to get out of a chat GPT like writing function. So again, for me, it's understanding where you're going to use AI and where AI can give you the biggest bang for the buck. For example, since we're talking about AI and RIM solutions, having AI help you understand what regulatory requirements are common across multiple markets is a reasonable place for AI to help your organization. AI helping you to understand the content of a regulatory submission in the context of multiple international submissions is a place where AI can help an organization, and I think is within the realm of capability and within the realm of maintenance within an organization to support it. But to answer your specific question, Priya, the humans got to go back and check. Once we've used AI and we use the functionality, there still needs to be a domestic and usually an international registration partner or multiple international registration partners who have to take a look at the resulting documents and agree that it's in fact an accurate description of the product and how we should communicate the safety and effectiveness profile of our product to a specific competent authority or a specific market. So right now, I can't envision AI as a standalone application just doing its thing and organizations relying on it exclusively in order to create submissions and manage their regulatory portfolio. There's always a human element associated with it. In my organization, there's a human element that's responsible for it. So there's a person's signature that's agreeing that this is the complete document, and they're agreeing that this is the package that's going to be submitted. It's not the AI components of the solution.
Completely agree.
Courtney, any thoughts, or you're sort of also echoing?
No, Don's the AI expert here. He's further along in the process than we are. Yeah, absolutely take Don's word. I'm, just looking, like, I'm excited to see things automated, right? That's kind of, I think, the first step is getting the AI functionality to automate things. But yeah, I don't know where we could be with having AI fully being able to do things without having that human check at this point.
Absolutely. I completely concur as well. There are two really good questions that I would like to address that are from the Q&A. One is around establishing regulatory intelligence in-house or reg intel programs. What are your thoughts? A lot of companies tend to have that, and then they try to look outside because they weren't able to maintain. But from your experience, how has that worked, and what are the best practices of establishing reg intel programs?
Yeah, so Reg Intel, and we talked about it earlier, right? All of the regulations that are coming at us. If you're in a smaller size company, and even in a large company, it is hard to keep up with everything. It's just constant from globally, right? We're getting it all the time. So I think you would have to build a pretty good size internal Reg Intel team, I think, to manage that, unless you're just having folks who are going out and reading the trade press, and that's the way you're getting your information. And I think it depends on, what size company you are, where you are in your development, what matters to you. But I think for smaller companies, I look at, a Reg Intel platform, if you don't have a global presence, as really an important tool, because otherwise you're going to all these countries, you're trying to go, fumble your way through their health regulators databases to find out what do I have to do to get, cleared or approved, registered in this country, where I think that type of Reg Intel is super beneficial to you, right? You have a one-stop shop. You can go, you can see what you need. You can, you're getting updates from everywhere. I think it's super hard to build inside because of the amount of regulations that we just have coming at us. I think to me, when we started this whole process, that was a low-hanging fruit. And we actually were one of the companies that went and did the Reg Intel first, and we got the Reg Intel module and did that for, a year before we started our RIMS project. Because we still have a network of folks. We are a global company. We've got a network that kind of enhances the Reg Intel. So we've got people who are parts of trade associations and are sort of getting that, the pre-look at what's coming down and out of different countries. But I just think it's essential to have, a tool that you can go to get the information you need.
I completely agree with Sue's comment. I don't think it's possible, regardless of the size of the organization, to do this activity manually anymore. If you include standards in the world of regulatory intel, I have no idea how you can track all the standards changes and all the regulatory changes, and be able to understand which ones apply to your product portfolio, and then manage the downstream analysis of those documents, communicate to the development teams what you might need to do in order to address the regulatory or standards changes without using regulatory intelligence tools like the functionality in RegDesk. Maybe 25 years or so ago, it was a simpler world, and you might have been able to do that with your matrix of registration partners and your domestic regulatory help. The world of regulatory, in my view, is way too complex. The definition of what is in regulatory has changed so much in the last 5 to 10 years that I don't know that it's possible to do this work without having some sort of central repository of your collective knowledge of what the regulatory landscape is.
I couldn't agree more. And this is something we constantly tell prospective clients as well. Don't try to establish this in-house without the right tools. There are a lot of advancements in technology. Let the technology company handle that, and they will do a far better job of keeping your teams compliant and notified of these changes, because in-house it's just doing a lot of administrative work to keep up with the changes. Another great question, some companies sometimes consider, or there's a push internally to say, we'll build an in-house RIM platform versus off the shelf. Any thoughts on that? I mean, all of you have worked for very large organizations, and was that ever a discussion to build something in-house? And if so, why not? Why did you opt for off the shelf solutions?
So yes is the answer to the question, and multiple stops along the way. We've had organizations who said, we're just going to build our own extension to our document management solution to manage the regulatory information, what we called regulatory information management in that organization. I think what you'll find is that you will quickly run out of resource in your software development function to create the complex relationships between the documents and the regulated markets that solution providers like you are able to provide the organization. So yeah, we've done homegrown a bunch of different times, and sometimes successful for the scope that we've targeted, but never anything that I think would be competitive in a RIM landscape if we were trying to, compete with the RegDesk, RIMSys, the dot compliance RIM solutions, you name it. There are a bunch of parties that are out there. Nothing that we've ever developed in-house that I think would be competitive to what today's solution providers are offering.
Yeah, I think we fall into that camp too. There's been, over time, definitely some attempts to make things better, because when you have nothing, anything looks better. So trying to just, incrementally improve on things. But again, it's your software developers, it's your IT folks to maintain the system. I think it just becomes a little unwieldy. So it was an easy choice to go with a outside platform that we could just use across the business. And again, it pushes standardization, right? Because we don't want 30 different business units all doing their own thing.
Yeah, same for us. The homegrown system that was built was very cumbersome and not user friendly. So, you know, the ease of use and I think getting people on board and actually being able to work quicker with the RIM system that will replace our homegrown systems was another plus for us.
And again, the other comment that I'll make, and this is just Don's personal experience, our homegrown system developers had maybe a passing knowledge of what GAMP 5 requirements were for defining and validating the homegrown solution. So what we ended up creating and sometimes may have served a business purpose, but also created a regulatory compliance challenge for the organization because I didn't have the documentation, the verification, and the validation documents to support that this is a tool that we should be using in a regulated medical device company.
And we have had companies approach us after spending years trying to maintain and update their internal platforms, and it just doesn't work. And I know Gartner has a lot of research on this too, and their research shows it is far more expensive monetarily and resource-wise to build your own solutions, technology solutions in-house. So our recommendation would be whether you use RegDesk or any other platform, please go and purchase off-the-shelf platform. And we also appreciate leaders who come in and want off the shelf and not try to do customization, because that's a whole other discussion we can have at a later time. I know we're very close to hitting 2 p.m. Eastern, but I want to once again thank you. And any last thoughts, anything you'd like to leave the attendees with?
Yeah, I think, I mean, working in this, you know, the years that we've had and we've been working in it, I think a system like this really will help you drive efficiency, you know, in your organization. And I think it's also, it highlights and makes visible to everybody where submissions are in the process, right? We didn't talk about that at all, but having tracking and knowing that if I'm a business and I sent it off to these countries to get submitted, I actually can see where things are and when I get my registrations. And so I think the communication piece, it really, it enhances it, right? You're stepping away from emails and SharePoints and you're moving towards, you know, this system. And I think it just, it really, again, the regulatory process from soup to nuts just makes it a lot more visible and efficient.
Yeah, to add to Sue's comments, I think you just have so much more control of what's going on in your regulatory department. Every company I've ever worked at, if you ask somebody where a product is sold internationally, you know, it takes like hours or days to find out. For some reason, that's not at a one-stop shop. And then just having, like Sue mentioned, the tracking abilities to see where all of the submissions are globally, where your change assessments are globally. And then I'm really excited to get into the AI and the submission module of this. I think, you know, if I would have had that 10 years ago when I was writing submissions, I would have been delighted. But it's really exciting just to move your regulatory team into the future and be able to have things, you know, at the click of a button instead of spending hours and hours doing research to find answers.
I guess my comment would be it's worth the journey. There are no perfect solutions, and all solutions come with costs, and all solutions come with limitations, and it's going to be a slog to stand these things up. My comment to Priya and the panel, and my comment to the attendees is, at the end of the day, I think you can make some incredibly positive improvements in the organization by approaching these technologies in the right way and utilizing them efficiently within your organization. There is a return on investment. There's a level of control. There's a level of transparency that comes from the utilization of these tools that I think is a benefit to any organization that wants to adopt them, wants to pursue adopting them.
Thank you once again, and thank you to our attendees for joining the webinar. Thank you for RAPS for hosting the webinar. And once again, I want to applaud and thank our esteemed and eminent panelists' time today and your insights into this topic, which is a hot topic right now. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.